Civilian evacuations are underway in Ukraine's Donetsk region, with Russia stepping up its attacks since claiming full control of neighbouring Luhansk. The city of Slovyansk has become a main target for shelling, but towns across Ukraine's east are being bombarded. Missiles struck Kharkiv on Wednesday, destroying a university. Ukrainian forces have dug in with new defensive lines, and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said Western-supplied weapons were finally making a difference on the battlefield. Well, for more, I'm joined by DW correspondent Nick Spicer, who's standing by for us in Kyiv. Good to see you, Nick. Now, the Russian offensive in the Donbass is grinding on. What is the latest news you can bring us?
Well, we've had a tactical retreat that you were just explaining earlier, where the Ukrainian troops who had been defending Donetsk and Lysychansk for weeks, whereas we thought it would be a matter of days. We kept hearing it's going to fall tomorrow, and they held out for a long time, evacuated, preventing another sort of Mariupol situation where the soldiers are taken prisoner and brought to Russia and so on. And they're now taking up those defensive positions you were referring to in the Donetsk region, which is the region that Vladimir Putin needs to take in order to control the entire Donbass, which he says is the next objective. And he said that earlier this week. However, they're dug in really deeply, and they've also managed to evade being caught in the cauldron that the Russians were talking about, catching them within. So taking up positions in Slovyansk, as you were saying, preparing to defend that city, but also Kramatorsk, which is a critical transport and rail hub. So awaiting the sort of onslaught, which will come as per usual via massive artillery barrages, and then at some point, if the Russians are so inclined, street by street fighting when they feel comfortable and safe enough to do that.
Now, Nick, President Zelensky's address overnight said that heavy weapons from Western allies have finally begun working at full capacity. Did he give any indication of how this would actually help in the war?
Yeah, I would say those that are there are working at full capacity, but it's we're very far from being at the full, wish list of what the Ukrainians want. One example, there are 4 American HIMARS systems, which are these precise, precision-guided missile systems. The Ukrainians want 300 of them. What they can do, however, is fire rockets into Russian-occupied territory within 1 meter accuracy. The Ukrainian rockets and Russian rockets up till now have 500 meters accuracy. So you can pinpoint something very precisely. And what Zelenskyy said in his speech was that they were going after, no surprise here, depots of ammunition, because our Ukrainians are massively outgunned, 10 to 1 when it comes to artillery shells going one way or the other. So the logical thing is just to take out those stocks of ammunition, and that's what the Ukrainians say they're doing, as well as command and control centers, to sort of cut the head off the snake and make it harder for the Russians to control their troops. And that's been a consistent problem for them throughout this campaign.
Nick Spicer in Kyiv, thank you. Well, with Ukraine's eastern province of Luhansk now under Russian control, Moscow has been stepping up its offensive in neighbouring Donetsk. Together, they make up the Donbass, which Russia wants to seize completely. So let's take a look at this map. Now, this is the territory that Russia has now taken in Ukraine. It includes the city, as you can see there, of Lysychansk, which was the last bastion of Ukrainian resistance in the Luhansk region. Now, analysts say the battle for Slovyansk, down here, is the next key contest in the struggle for the Donbass. And experts also believe that Russian forces are attempting to advance west from Lysychansk to the town of Siversk. And they suggest that Russia is likely to try to push towards Bakhmut from the south. Well, let's bring in a military analyst and also former British Army officer, Mike Martin. Good to see you, and thanks for joining us here on DW. So President Zelenskyy says the heavy weapons from Ukraine's Western allies are working at full capacity. How much of a concern is this, though, for the Russian forces?
I think it does make a difference, particularly the longer-range artillery that your correspondent cited in the earlier report. What that allows the Ukrainians to do is to do what's called counter-battery fire, so targeting Russian artillery And that means that the Russian artillery has to move, and the more it has to move between firing, the less effective it is. As well, your correspondent cited that with the longer range, and some of the HIMARS can go up to 450 kilometres, so that's obviously a very long way. They can use that to target supply depots and ammunition depots. And we've seen a number of Russian depots being blown up or targeted by artillery over the last week, 2 weeks.
Now, Mike, Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared victory for Russian forces in Luhansk, and the focus has shifted to Slovyansk, and that's according to British intelligence. Is it a matter of time before the entire Donbass falls to Russia, or is that looking a little bit less likely now, considering this information that we've just been talking about?
I think it's an open question as to whether the Russians will be able to control the whole of the Donbass. Your viewers will probably have seen recently that yesterday President Putin announced an operational pause, and this is basically a cessation of military activities so that they can regroup. And whilst it is normal, you wouldn't do it unless you had to, which tells us that the Russians have experienced either lots of casualties, lots of battle damage to their equipment, or they are running low on supplies. So I think it is possible that the Russians will take the whole of the Donbass. But in a sense, if you zoom out to the strategic picture, the question is how much does that really matter? Because the Ukrainians are also pushing forward in the north and in the south.
Now, Mike, is it possible that the Kremlin is preparing for a protracted war with the intention of taking much larger portions of Ukraine?
That is possible, but they are going to need to do a couple of things in order to do that. The first is to put their economy on a war footing, much like the countries of Europe did in the Second World War, for example. And we have seen some slow moves towards that. Obviously, with the sanctions, they've been having problems getting specific components, so they have been looking at how they can get around that. But more than that, they would need to do a mobilization of personnel. If we look at Russian losses, OK, estimates are very hard to verify precisely, but they're either up to 35,000 or more likely to be about 20,000 Russian losses. Replacing those is going to be very, very difficult without announcing a general mobilization of the Russian population, which, of course, President Putin doesn't want to do because this is not a war. It's only a special military operation. So it will be difficult for them to do that.
Military analyst Mike Martin, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Ukraine's Odessa was once one of the liveliest cities on the Black Sea, but its port is closed, unable to ship wheat to the world. And anyone planning to go for a swim should think again. DW correspondent Emmanuel Shaz visited the city, and her report was filmed under conditions set out by the Ukrainian military.
We're here in the port city of Odessa, southern Ukraine. Usually at this time of the year, the city will be full with tourists. They would sunbath on the beach, except this year, a lot of beaches are mined. The Ukrainian armed forces planted mines on the beaches to stop the Russians landing.
Of course, we do not name or show which sections of the coast are mined. We have geographical features that are favorable for landing of troops. So if that happens, we have prepared a few surprises, let's say.
We're not allowed to film more than this. Our Ukrainian military minders say anything identifiable might help the Russians. Locals still come to the beach. They're stressed by air raid alarms and the absence of tourists.
Every year come to us many million people. And Odessa is a beautiful city, near the sea, near the Black Sea. But now we don't have this.
It's uncomfortable. It was nice when we could go to the sea. Now, with the state of emergency, we are restricted. But where would I go? There is nowhere to go.
Куда ехать? Некуда ехать.
Вообще, на самом деле, для нас море — это все. Мы как одесситы.
We are Odessans. We were born and raised here, and the sea is everything for us. But in the current situation, we have to be prepared to make sacrifices for victory, for our future. We can breathe in the fresh air, but sadly, we can't get to the sea anymore.
Дышим свежим воздухом, но, к сожалению, к морю не подходим. Очень жаль.
And in the town, locals might stroll the streets, but shops and restaurants are empty.
Дуже мало туристів. У нас до цього
There are very few tourists now.
з Ізраїлю, з
We used to have many guests from Israel, Europe, Germany, France, and even from the USA. Many people who worked here, especially the women, left the country in the first week of the war. We kept the restaurants open to provide food for those who needed it.
When or if Odessans come home, they will find a city in need of revival.